So we're going to continue our series now. So we're looking at divine encounters. So these places where Jesus meets with people in their normal, everyday, day-to-day life. And last week we met Zacchaeus. He was a curious seeker, a man who climbed a tree to see Jesus and discovered that Jesus was a seeking Savior, was looking for him. And today we're going to look at a man who was also seeking Jesus. And like Zacchaeus, who couldn't see Jesus because of a physical impairment, because he was short, he had little legs, this man too couldn't see Jesus because of a physical problem. He was blind. He literally couldn't see him. But we're going to see how this man, a man who couldn't see, a man who didn't really move around much, a man who had no standing, no power, no wealth, somehow saw Jesus more clearly than almost anyone else in the Gospels. So we're going to look at Luke 18, verses 35 to 43. So let's read that. It's a little bit bigger than it was last week, but I'm not going to test your eyesight this morning. It says this: As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, "Jesus of Nazareth is passing by." He called out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. When he came near, Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord, I want to see," he replied. And Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight. Your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they also praised God. So notice, Jesus was approaching Jericho. Same as last week when Jesus met Zacchaeus. And Al asked me earlier on if I'd planned out all this series, and I think if I'd planned it as well as I could have, then I would have started with this story last week, because this happens immediately before Jesus meets Zacchaeus. So Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem here. The context is still the same. He's about to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey. He's about to be welcomed with the crowds, shouting and singing Hosanna, and welcoming the Messiah as king. And Jesus, knowing that this would be his final week on earth, that the crowds that were welcoming him and shouting Hosanna were going to turn on him and shall crucify him, that the religious leaders were going to arrest him and sentence him to death. He knows that, so he's preaching and he's teaching and on his way, and he's gathering a crowd. And as he's approaching Jericho, so this is a city just before they get to Jerusalem, Luke, very simply in his gospel, tells us that there was a blind man sitting by the roadside begging. And this man sitting by the roadside, it was probably his spot. That's where he went. I used to get the train to work every day, and used to get off Cathays, and I used to walk to work, and every day there'd be the same man in the same spot begging. And that's it's same back then as it was today. Like, people have their own patch, people have their own spot. And this was his life. He was probably with other beggars, probably with other people who had physical impairments. They could have been lame, or they might have had disease. And at the time, these weren't just medical conditions. You were shunned and you were marginalized from society because a condition like this almost meant like you couldn't work, which meant that you couldn't fully participate in life, which meant you couldn't fully participate in the religious traditions, and you were dependent on others. You were extremely vulnerable. So you were set up for poverty, basically, for life because of a physical impairment that you had no control over, relying on charity from strangers to survive. And remember last week when we were looking at the context, Jesus has been teaching about money. He's been teaching about wealth. He literally just spoke to the rich young ruler and said, like, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. And now there's a blind man who is begging for his survival. This man, he must have heard about Jesus before. He must have. And it's often said, isn't it, that when you lose one sense, the other senses become heightened. So I imagine this man who is unable to see has great hearing. He's always listening, partly because he was vulnerable and he couldn't see people who were going to steal his money, who were going to maybe physically hurt him. So I think he was listening for danger. I think that's a sensible assumption to make. But I also think that he would be listening to people talk as they walk past. And he would be in the same spot day in, day out. And I think when somebody is is, is, is there all the time. They become familiar, don't they? Almost to the point where you just walk past and you don't even realize they're there. So he would have been listening to, the religious leaders, from the rich men, from the poor men, from Jesus' followers, the Jews, the Romans. He would have been listening out to everybody, and everybody would just be, it's just him, They're not conscious or careful about what they're saying because he's just part of, he just lives on the outskirts of Jericho. And it says that as a crowd gathers and pass by where he's sitting, he can sense. He can't see what's going on, but he can sense that something is happening, something unusual, something out of the ordinary. And he says to people like, what's going on? What's happening? It's almost like there's a buzz or there's a sense of anticipation or excitement in the air. There's this energy that's going on. And it says the crowd told him that Jesus was passing by. And look at what the blind man does when he hears the news. He cried out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. He shouted, Jesus, Son of David. He didn't shout out Rabbi or teacher or the man from Nazareth. Or he doesn't even just call him Jesus. He doesn't even just say his name. He calls him Son of David. He acknowledges this messianic title of Jesus. And it's a declaration that Jesus is the promised one. He's a descendant of King David, the one who was promised to come and restore Israel, the anointed one of God. The Messiah, Jesus being called the Son of David, is this fulfillment of prophecy made through Nathan, the prophet Nathan, to King David, where it says in 2 Samuel, when your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build my house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. This is the fulfillment of that prophecy way back when that Nathan told David, the son of David, one of his descendants to come to be this person, to establish the throne of God's kingdom forever. And the blind man, the man who couldn't see, recognizes Jesus as the promised Messiah, as the King of Israel, and as the healer of the people. This man might be physically blind, but he is spiritually awake. He can see clearly. The religious leaders who could see, who did have eyes, who had studied the scriptures their entire lives, who had witnessed Jesus' miracles, who had spent time with him, who had questioned him, who had spoken to him, they didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They could see him, yet they didn't acknowledge who he was. They debated it. They doubted it. They ultimately rejected who he was. In fact, at this time, they were probably plotting and trying to put together a plan so that when Jesus did enter Jerusalem, they would try and catch him in some trap, and they wanted to have a legitimate reason to arrest him. But this blind beggar, who had never seen Jesus perform a miracle, who had never sat under his teaching, who couldn't read scriptures, who knew him only by his reputation, this man saw clearly who Jesus really was. He had spiritual sight. And I think sometimes our physical sight can sometimes blind us to spiritual realities. Do you know what I mean by that? Sometimes when we see things happening, we think that we know what's happening. We can't see what God is really doing. We can't see things in the spiritual realm sometimes because our minds are so conditioned to know what to expect from God. We are seeing in the natural, and sometimes that blinds us to what God is doing in the supernatural. You ever seen any of these? These lines here? No. The middle line, which one is longer? They're the same size. But what does our brain do? Our brain is telling us that this one on the right is bigger. Like how many black dots? I don't know if you can see that, but if you're looking at that, there's black dots everywhere, whereas there's no black dots anywhere in reality. They're all white. And these lines, if we were to put a ruler across them, they're all straight. They're all parallel with each other. Yeah, we've all got eyes. We can all see that, and we'd all be like, Dave, you're lying. Like, there's no way that they are straight. But the reality is, they are. And none of these are moving. I don't know if you can see that properly, but if you look at that differently, like, your eyes, although we can physically see, it plays tricks on us sometimes. That we rely on our physical sight, sometimes at the expense of what we can, of our spiritual sight. We see what we expect to see. We see what we want to see. We see what fits our preconceptions. But this blind man, unencumbered by physical sight, he saw with eyes of faith. And if we look around us at our friends or family or whoever we watch on social media or whatever we watch on the TV or news or radio channels we listen to, if people don't know Jesus as Lord, as the Son of God, as the Messiah, they're not stupid. They're just blind. They're blind. The world is blind. They cannot see what we're talking about. They do not understand Jesus or understand what we're doing because they are blind, and they have always been blind to the reality of who Jesus is. I remember once, I can tell you the exact date, March the 3rd, 1996. It was the first time that I went to see Liverpool. And when we went up to Liverpool, I went with my friend Rich and Mike Harrington. He bought me a McDonald's. He bought me a McChicken sandwich. And as I bit into it, I was like, oh, what's that? That tastes a bit funny. And there was mayonnaise in it. Now, I'd never had mayonnaise before. I didn't know what mayonnaise tasted. I didn't even know that chicken sandwiches came with mayonnaise. Do you know why? Because my mother doesn't like mayo. So whenever we went to McDonald's and she bought us a McChicken sandwich, she'd always say, can I have it without mayo? See, you only know what you know. I didn't know that sandwich came with any sauce. I didn't know that there was mayonnaise supposed to be in it. I'd never experienced it. I'd never tasted it. Until somebody shows you or reveals you, well, actually, no, this is what it's supposed to be like. Why would you know? You only know what you know. And I didn't know. And things that seem obvious cannot be seen by people who are spiritually blind, but have physical sight. And we look around, and as much as we share the gospel, as much as we tell people about Jesus, as much as we live it, people are spiritually blind. And there's plenty of people out there who believe that Jesus existed. Like they believe that he's real. They believe that he was a great teacher. They even follow his teachings. And they live according to Jesus' ways, but do not acknowledge him as Lord and the one who is able to save them from their sins. And I think it's one of the best tactics that the devil uses, to allow people to acknowledge Jesus' existence and believe him in part, but not surrender their lives to him. Sin blinds us from seeing God. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 4, he says, the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. You know, this man, he begs for mercy. That's what he wants from Jesus. He cries out for mercy, and the crowd who are following Jesus basically tells him to shut up. They're like, what are you doing? Just keep your mouth closed. And they rebuke him for his request. Imagine like somebody saying, oh, give me mercy, and getting told off for that request. Like, it's not as if he's saying, oh, Jesus, give me money, or Jesus, like, give me shelter, or Jesus, like, show me a miracle. He's asking for mercy, and yet the followers of Jesus rebuke him for that. I don't know if Jesus' followers there, or the crowd, really knew who Jesus was themselves. They're following him. They're lapping up his teachings. They're physically present. They can see him with their eyes, but I think they're blinded to who he really is. Because if they really knew his power and his purpose, there's no way that they would be rebuking this man for asking for mercy. Because they would know that this is the only man who can actually give this man mercy and offer him forgiveness. This man knew that only Jesus could give him what he really needed. This blind man could see more clearly than the crowds who could see Jesus, which I think is a stark warning to us, because we might think that we can see. We might think that we can see Jesus. We might think that we see him, that we've fixed our eyes on him. But the warning here is that we've been blinded, or we could be blinded, and we aren't really seeing the true greatness and power of Jesus. You question, what's the point in church? Why am I even here? Why am I reading the Bible? Like, what's going on? Like, why do I want to go and spend time with other Christians? Like, you don't get excited, or you don't even see the point of fellowship with other believers, being a part of their lives, allowing others to be a part of your life, being vulnerable with others. Your heart is hardened to the word or to spiritual conversations, and you distract yourself by other things to avoid spending time in his presence. Mercy is given to those who are able to see God. The crowd, they didn't get it. But this blind man sat on the side of the road begging, saw it clearly. And as he was saying, shut up, like, stop talking, stop distracting the teacher, what did he do? He shouted even louder. he continued. He didn't bow to the crowd's wishes. He refused to be silent. He shouted all the more. His desperation was greater than his fear of soul. Like, what did he have to lose? He was already outcast. He was already set aside. He was already out of the community. What did he have to lose? His faith was stronger than the crowd's skepticism. And this teaches us something about seeking Jesus. That genuine faith persists despite opposition. Do you know what? You might have tried to find Jesus before. You might have been seeking him before, and you might have come across, well, there's someone I know who says, God stopped talking to me, or God doesn't respond to me anymore. God doesn't listen to me. I can't feel God. I don't know that he's really there. And you just give up. Like, what's the point? I've tried. Genuine faith persists despite opposition. Real desperation doesn't take a no from the crowd when it knows that it can get a yes from Jesus. You know, when Jesus told the rich young ruler that in order to get, he said, like, what do I need to do to have eternal life? And the guy's like, I've kept all the commands. I've kept all the commandments. Like, he told Jesus that. But he was blind to the fact that what he really needed was mercy from Jesus. He didn't need anything. He didn't need to do anything. He didn't need to, work at it. He just needed to surrender his life to Jesus. And when Jesus says, give up what you've got, give up your wealth, give to the poor, and submit to me, he's like, I can't do that. He was blind to the fact about what he needed. Yet this blind man is not blind spiritually at all. He understands his ultimate need. Like, he doesn't need food. He doesn't need money. He doesn't need his sight. Yes, he needs all those things, but ultimately, when he came face to face with Jesus, he knew all he needed was mercy, was forgiveness. He strongly desired mercy, unlike the rich young ruler who wanted to keep his money and wealth and have security of eternity in heaven. He didn't even know he was blind to what Jesus was showing him. Jesus was just a means to an end for him. He was unable to see his sinfulness, so didn't come to Jesus for forgiveness and salvation. Mercy doesn't come to those who stand on their own merits and righteousness, believing their goodness makes them okay with God. Mercy is given to those who know that they see their need for forgiveness. And mercy is on offer today, and mercy is available to all of us. Seek Jesus and ask him for it. Recognize that you need it. We all need it. You might need physical healing. You might need money. You might need help. But above all, recognizing that we need mercy from the Lord, forgiveness from God. Well, that's the greatest need that we all have. So this man was blind physically, but had clear spiritual vision. Spiritual vision that led to belief that Jesus was God and faith in him as Lord and Savior. He says that Jesus stopped. In the midst of his journey to Jerusalem, where he's going, he knows his end point. In the midst of teaching the crowd, in the midst of teaching his disciples, in the midst of this crowd pressing all around him, Jesus stopped for one blind beggar. And this is the nature of our God. He's never too busy. Things are never too important. He's never too preoccupied to stop for someone who calls out to him in faith. The crowd wanted to silence the beggar, yet Jesus wanted to hear him. The crowd saw an interruption, yet Jesus saw a divine appointment, an encounter that he could demonstrate his power and transform not just the blind man's life, but the crowd's as well. It says Jesus ordered the man to be brought to him, and the very people who had been telling this man to be quiet were now the conduit. They were the instrument of actually bringing him to Jesus. And sometimes the opposition we face actually becomes the means by which we get to Jesus. And I love this phrase, when he came near. When he came near, Jesus asked him. So my gran was blind, and she used to literally sit this far away from the TV. But when we went to the house, so when any of us grandkids went to the house or Alan and Sue, she would get up close to us. And she would sometimes feel us, or she would see an outline of who we are, and she could tell sometimes. She couldn't tell the difference between me and Nathan and Alan sometimes. But she would get up close. She would beckon us to come near to her. She couldn't see from a distance, but she was like, come to me. And I love this phrase, and he came near. Of course, Jesus could see him. Jesus could see him from a distance, so this wasn't for Jesus' benefit, although he does come close to those who are seeking. But I reckon that this is for the blind man's benefit, to be physically close, to maybe see an outline, or to maybe allow the man to reach and touch Jesus. And then you get one of the most beautiful questions in the Bible. Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you? What do you want? What do you want from me? Seems like an obvious question, doesn't it? The man is blind. He's sat by the road begging. Jesus would have heard this man calling for mercy, crying out for mercy, but now he's up close. He says, yeah, but what do you want? Jesus knows what he wants. But Jesus asks him anyway. He wants to hear the man articulate his need. And sometimes, we struggle with prayer sometimes because it says God knows your needs before you even ask him. So I'm like, well, what's the point in asking him then? If he already knows, what am I doing here? But prayer isn't informing God of something that he doesn't know. Prayer is expressing our need to him, knowing that he knows anyway. He wants us to be specific. He wants us to name it. He wants us to bring our needs before him. There's something powerful about putting our deepest needs into words. I think the man also Jesus honors the man's dignity as well. Like, it's easy to assume that a blind man wants to see. But rather than just assuming, he asks him. He treats the blind man as he shows him love. He shows him compassion. He gives him a voice that matters. He says, I don't just see you as a blind man. I see you as a person. Now you tell me what you need. And then I also think that Jesus wants a specific answer. A specific request, because Jesus responds to specific needs. Sometimes we pray, Lord, help me. Lord, be with me. Lord, like these big, grand, vague prayers, which are, like, God hears those. Like, they're okay. But if somebody says, like, did the Lord answer, the be with me prayer? Well, yeah, he did. He's always with me. But sometimes he wants us to be specific. Lord, heal me. Restore this relationship. Help me to speak to this person with courage and truth. Specific prayers allow us to see specific answers. And the blind man doesn't hesitate. He goes from, Lord, show me mercy, to, Lord, I want to see. I want to see. Simple, direct, and specific. This is faith speaking. Like, he's not trying to impress with eloquent words. He hasn't got like a long prayer, the prayers that we go around the houses and we say like 1,000,001 things, and we really want to get, this is the thing that I want, but I'm gonna praise you, and I'm gonna give you all, and all that is good, but the man just says, I want to see. I just want to see it. Just honest desperation. And he calls Jesus Lord. First he calls him the Son of David, the Messiah. Now he calls him Lord, the one who has authority over his life. This is more than just, the man asking Jesus for a favor. This is his submission to Jesus' lordship. And Jesus' response is simple again. Receive your sight. Your faith has healed you. Receive your sight. Receive what you've asked for immediately. Like, it's complete, it's authoritative. And then Jesus adds this remarkable statement, your faith has healed you. I'm like, I thought you healed him, Jesus. Like, what does that phrase mean? Like, your faith has healed you. And here's what Jesus is teaching us. Faith is a pipeline or a conduit through which God's grace and power flows to us. It means that it's the means by which we receive what God offers, but faith itself doesn't generate the healing or salvation. Does that make sense? So this cord here is the channel that brings power from that mixing desk or those speakers to this microphone. This power, this cord, doesn't create the electricity. It doesn't create the power, but it is the means by which the power gets to this microphone. Faith is not the source. The blind man's faith doesn't heal him. Jesus healed him. The power and the mercy and the ability to heal comes from Jesus, which is where this man's faith was placed. Because if faith was the source, then we could heal ourselves through just positive thinking. I've got faith that I can be healed. Bam, healed. It doesn't work like that. The focus would be on how strong our faith is, which means that, the more faith you've got, the more blessed you are, the more healing you get, the more money you get, whatever that is. It inverts our gaze from looking at Jesus to looking at ourselves. We'd be trusting in our trust. We'd be trusting in our faith rather than trusting in Jesus and having faith in Jesus. So when Jesus says, your faith has healed you, he wasn't saying that this man's faith had like any healing properties, but rather the man's faith reached out to Jesus, the source of everything, and Jesus responded with healing power. The faith is directional. It pointed away from self towards Christ. He called him Lord. I want to see. Jesus, you have authority over me. I have faith that you can heal me. His faith wasn't in the healing. His faith was in the healer. And faith opens the door for God to work. You know, it's why Jesus often asks people in the New Testament, do you believe that I'm able to do it? Do you believe that I can do it? He asks his disciples, he asks people that he meets. It's not that God needs our faith to be like powerful. His power exists whether we believe in it or not. But our faith positions us to receive what God wants to give us. The blind man's faith had several characteristics worth noting. He recognized who Jesus was. He was the Son of David. He acknowledged his own need. Lord, have mercy on me. It persisted despite the opposition. He shouted all the more. He made a specific request, I want to see. And then he trusted in Jesus' authority. Lord. This is what faith looks like. It's not just an intellectual assent to the facts of who Jesus is. I know he existed. I believe that he was a good teacher. It's not just emotional feelings about spiritual things. It's recognizing who Jesus really is, acknowledging our need, and trusting him enough to ask specifically and persist expectantly, knowing that Jesus can. Immediately, he received his sight. Immediately. Not gradually, not eventually, not after a period of spiritual formation, but immediately. When Jesus speaks, transformation happens. When faith meets the power of God, miracles occur in real time. This man has lived his entire life in darkness. Never seen color, never seen faces, hadn't seen the world around him. And suddenly, in an instant, light floods into his eyes. And who does he see? He sees Jesus. The first thing he sees is Jesus' face because he is near. He's like, come near to me. And he is there. And then he looks up and he sees the crowd. The ones that tried to silence him, the ones that were telling him to shut up. He sees the road that he's been sitting on for years. Everything is new. Everything is different. Everything has changed. He says immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus. He followed Jesus. He became one of Jesus' followers. He found a new belonging to a community, to a family, as a disciple of Jesus. He didn't run home to show his family. He didn't go to the temple to make an offering. He didn't stop to celebrate with friends. He followed Jesus. The natural response to receiving from Jesus is following Jesus. When Jesus transforms our lives, staying close to him becomes our biggest priority. And he was praising. He was worshipping. He knew that his healing wasn't about him. It was about making God known. He's like, look at what Jesus has done to me. Like, I was blind, but now I see. Not because of anything that I have done, but because of who he is. His miracle became his testimony, and his transformation became his worship. And then Luke adds this beautiful detail at the end. He says, when all the people saw it, when the crowd who was telling him to shut up, trying to like rebuke him for asking for mercy, when all the people that were with him saw it, they also praised God. This blind man's encounter with Jesus became a witness to everyone around him. His faith inspired faith in others. His healing pointed others to God. And this is always how it works. When Jesus transforms one life, it has an effect. It has a ripple effect on those around you, on the people that you see, on the people that you encounter. You can't help but tell people about what Jesus has done to you. The crowd that tried to silence his cry ended up joining his praise. Just want to sum up just by reminding us what this passage says. It says spiritual sight is more important than physical sight. The blind man couldn't see with his eyes, but he saw with his heart. He had a seeing faith. He recognized Jesus as the Messiah. Know that Jesus responds to persistent, specific faith. The blind man didn't just cry out once hoping that Jesus would hear him. He called out. He got told to be quiet. He called even louder. When Jesus asked what he wanted, he gave a specific answer. This is the kind of faith that Jesus honors. Bold, specific, and persistent. And finally, receiving from Jesus naturally leads to following Jesus. This blind man didn't just take his healing. He didn't just take the gift and go his own way. He didn't just say, oh, thanks, Jesus, for that, and off he went in the opposite direction. He followed Jesus. And as he went, he praised. When we truly encounter Jesus and receive from him, it changes the direction of our lives. And I just want to close by asking a personal question. What do you need to see today? Maybe you need to see who Jesus really is. That he's not just another religious teacher or historical figure, but he is the Son of David. He is the Messiah. He is the Lord who has power to transform lives. Maybe you need to see your own condition this morning. Your need for mercy, your need for forgiveness, your dependence on God, your inability to fix yourself or save yourself. Maybe you need to see hope. In a world of darkness, that might have been your life up to now. You need to see light in your eyes, hope for healing, hope for change, hope for a future that is different from your past. Maybe you need to see clearly what you should do next. Maybe there's a decision that you need to make, or a step you need to take, a person you need to forgive, a sin habit that you need to break. This blind man shows us the path to seeing clearly, which begins with crying out to Jesus. Not politely, not quietly, not with perfection or big words, but just desperately, persistently, and specifically. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Here's what I do know. Jesus stops for people who cry out to him. The same person, the same Jesus who stopped on the road to Jericho for Zacchaeus last week, not last week, but 1,000 years ago, and the blind man here, he stops for you too. He's not too busy, he's not too important, he's not too bothered by your desperation or put off by your need. He stops and he asks you the same question he asked the blind man. What do you want me to do for you? And how will you answer? What do you want the Lord to do for you today? What do you need from Jesus today? He wants to hear you say it. He wants to hear you express it. He wants you to name it, to ask specifically, to trust him with your deepest needs. And maybe you're here today and you've never had a real encounter with Jesus. You might have heard about him, you might believe in him or certain facts about him, but you've never personally cried out to him for mercy. Today can be that day. You don't need perfect faith, you just need honest faith. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to recognize your need and believe that Jesus can meet it. And maybe you used to follow Jesus. Maybe you used to follow him closely, but somewhere along the journey you've stopped. You've received from him once and you walk in your own path. The blind man's response calls you back. Receive your sight again and follow Jesus, praising God. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. That's the prayer that changed everything for this blind beggar 2,000 years ago. And it's the prayer that can change everything for you today. He's listening, he's stopping for you, and he's asking, what do you want me to do?